Hi, welcome back to Professional Bookworms. We've got a lot to talk about this episode, and as a result, this is by far the longest script I've ever written. Okay, now this will be a bit of a different video than what we usually do, but I have a couple of announcements to make, which I'll get to later. Those will be at the end of the video. If you want to go there, Ravi will put up a timestamp right here, and you can skip straight to that part. Before that, the main run of this video will just be me going over every single book I've read this year, which in total amounts to 33 books. Now, at the time of writing this video, I've only read 32, but the final book will be a reread, and I already have a pretty solid idea of where it will go and what my opinions on it are. And hopefully, I'll have written a review for it by then, by the time this is out. Another point, it's pretty clear that I've read a lot less this year than most years, and that's for a very good reason because this year is super exciting. I'm Indian. I am in the 10th grade. As anyone who lives in India would know, that's a very important year for us, academically as well as for our future careers. So my time for reading has been halved and my time for studying has quadrupled. This is also why I won't be reading anything in December, January, or February, plus the first half of March. And as the first round of keyboards start in December, followed by the second round 10 days after in January. The whole quarter of chaos being topped off with the big one, boards, starting in February and ending in early March. Now, doesn't that sound like fun? But anyway, let's get away from all that stuff and get into. Now, this book has changed to keep in the section where I talk about what I read this year, as I started this book in 2023 and I finished it quite early in 2024. This was my second book in the Discworld series by Sir Terry Pratchett, having read Guards earlier in 2023. Since Discworld has actually gone on to become one of my favorites. Seriously, it is perfect. Go read it. But getting back to this specific book, I really liked it. It wasn't as good as Guards, but more so because that's a very high standard, considering just how good Guards actually is. But I still love this book a bit. It's about a farmer boy named Mort becoming Death's apprentice, and Mort himself is a very interesting character, as being in his head alone is extremely fun. His thoughts about the world around him just ooze with Sir Terry's humor, and who would want that? The rest of Mort mostly follows him and the shenanigans he gets up to under Death's hand. But I won't get into for spoiler reasons. Interestingly, upon first reading this book, I didn't think much of it, but as my time away from it increases, I find myself thinking of it more fondly than I did earlier. Now, a flaw in this book is that its ending is ever so slightly lackluster, but that's just a complaint that I give. I'm pretty sure that most others would disagree. But yeah, Mort is an overall great book, though it's not really near the heights this world would come to reach in my reading journey. But we'll get to that later. I gave Mort a 92 out of 100, and after that, we get into my continued journey through my favorite book series, The Wheel of Time. Look at it up there. Yeah. And this is book 9 in said series. Now, for those of you who don't know, The Wheel of Time has an infamous reputation because of a string of books in its middle, namely books 8, 9, and 10 called The Slog. As you can probably tell by the name, it's not called that affectionately. The complaints about the slug mainly arise from pacing issues in these three books, with most people claiming that literally nothing happens. Obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there is some foundation to the claim. Personally, it wasn't much of a problem for me, except in one book, but in this specific novel, it only reared its ugly head in one character subplot. I won't tell you who said character is, but oh boy, were their chapters annoying. One thing I find ironic about how it's claimed that nothing happens in these three books is the fact that one of the biggest moments that changed the course of the series forevermore took place in this very book. Yeah, you heard me right. The three books where literally nothing happens, however, is one of the most monumental events in the span of the entire series. One further reflection that kind of sort of does make sense, as the complaints aren't really concerning the amount of events happening, but rather the pace at which they happen. That being said, I gave Winter's Heart an 87 out of 100. Funny story about this book, when I was reading it, one of my friends thought it was a romance book because of the title. Yeah. And speaking of that, let's move on to the next book in the Wheel of Time. And this is a big one because most people consider this to be the worst book in the whole series. I don't agree, but second worst isn't actually that much better. Actually, a similar thing happened with Crosses of Twilight as with Winter's Heart. As when I was reading this in the school library, one of the librarians asked what I was reading. I showed her the cover of this book, and she said, and I quote, Twilight? In absolute disgust. I didn't correct her, and I will never live that down. Talking about the actual book though, it was not quite as bad as most indicated it was. No, it was definitely rough. This is one of the slowest books I've ever read. And you might be confused, like I was. Once I finished book 9, I too thought to myself, wait, how is the book that comes after this the most boring book of the series? It can't be. I am super excited to see how this big event affects the characters. And that's the thing. The book barely acknowledges the event. In fact, most of the book is just characters who weren't involved in the event in any way, shape, or form, wandering around, following whatever subplot drove them at this point in the series, sensing the event, then going, wait, the hell was that? And then moving on with their lives. At most, the big life changing event is acknowledged in one chapter. One storming chapter. Yeah, when I said I only experienced the slog in one book, is it that obvious that this is the book I'm talking about? Good. Other than that, this book was pretty fine for what it was. Though that one aspect made it infinitely more frustrating. Process of Twilight tends to be seen as the calm before the storm in the fandom, especially looking at how amazing the next four books are. But we'll get to that later. I give Crossroads of Twilight a 66 out of 100, the second lowest in the series. Though looking back on it, I can see myself giving it a higher rating. Maybe on a reread. Perhaps I was too hard on it. And moving on to the next book, what's a reading year without some good old Sanderson? And trust me, this year there was a lot of good old Sanderson. The first book I read of the three Cosmere Secret Project, spawned by the most successful Kickstarter of all time, was of course Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And you might be going, Sid, Yumi is the second Secret Project. You should have started with Chires. And to that I say, yeah, I tried to. Truth be told, the only reason I read Yumi first was because it was the first secret project that became available on my library card. It could have been a mistake, but it's a mistake I am ready to live with because wow, is Yumi an absolutely amazing book. This is actually my first romance novel. Fitting that it be Sanderson who wrote it, I know. But I loved it a hell of a lot more than I expected. I mean, it's Sanderson. Obviously, I like it, but I was not expecting to like it this much because this book is absolutely amazing from beginning to end. Yumi and Painter are equally amazing characters. I can feel Srishan giving me death glares from across the room, and the plot is deeply engaging, while also having a strangely cozy quality to it. I don't know, it's a feeling that I can't explain. Plus, the way this book is written, the narration is perfection incarnate. I won't tell you who the narrator is, but getting a full blown novel and story told by them is something that before reading this book I could have only dreamed of. The little quirks that are worked into the writing as a result of this narration are so refreshing and filled with personality. Out of the three secret projects in the Cosmere, this is far and away my favorite, and I know many of you would agree. I gave Yumi and the Nightmare Painter a 94 out of 100. And immediately after I read Yumi, my hold on the very first secret project was complete and I was able to read it. And as I did with Yumi, I loved this one as well. Not quite as much, but pretty darn close. This is a book that has charm seeping through each and every part that makes it up. It is just ridiculous how fun this book is. It shouldn't have the right to be, and yet it just is. It shares a narrator with Yumi, and so most of my praise for that book's writing style tends to stick with this one. But maybe it's even better here, as the narration in Yumi was considerably more reserved, but the unbridled chaos of Tress's narration is an absolute joy at every single turn. Like Yumi, this is refreshingly different from most of Sanderson's work, taking a less grand and epic scale than most of what he does. And that's why these two shine so bright among the rest of his work, and why I love them so much. My love for this book is also amplified by the fact that this is what I was reading upon moving. And the day I finally settled into the new house was the day that I sat down and finished this book. And I love it all the more for that. I have considerably less to say about this book than Yumi, but just know that I love every bit of it almost as much. Getting back to the absolute masterpiece that is Discworld, now is finally the time to talk about what is my personal favorite of the series, at least what I've read so far. That, of course, being the second City Watch book, Men at Arms. And let's cut right to the chase. This book is funny, extremely funny. I'm not one to laugh out loud in most books. If a book is funny, it gets chuckles at most. Never full blown fits of laughter. Somehow, this book manages to have one of those every 5 pages. Seriously, it was that good. Now, I know this isn't the best of the Discworld books I've read. That goes to another one later down the line. But in terms of my absolute enjoyment of it, as well as just being my personal favorite, I can't fight having this being my favorite. because it feels like every aspect of this book is perfect. First off, it builds off the first City Watch book, cards perfectly with the characters that we already know, while expanding the cast beyond the original. All the new characters were just an absolute delight to read, as of course it is Discworld. There are so many other reasons that I love this book. For one thing, it tackles its themes in ways that allow the reader to take it seriously while simultaneously bringing Discworld humor and charm to it, while not feeling like it underplays the tone that the rest of the book sets up. That's a massively impressive skill, one that many stories would benefit from learning. Man at Arms is freaking amazing, and I will not hear anyone say otherwise. And as such, it gets a resounding 96 out of 100. And immediately after Men at Arms, I threw myself right back into the story of Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which to everyone's surprise, I quite liked. Enjoying something that part to be recommended thoroughly was not on my 2023 bingo card, but I'll take it nonetheless. Now, in my opinion, this was a bit of a step down from the first book. No, not by much. I doubt that Mrs. Jackson's writing could take much of a step down because she is an all around incredible writer. But rather, I would say that it lacks a bit of decorum or maybe weight would be a better word that the first one seemed to have. Of course, it still has that, but everything feels less impactful than the first. The ending of the book makes up for that tenfold, however. On its own, the ending holds a lot of weight, and sometimes it might feel like it just came out of nowhere. But in the end, that somewhat works in its favor. Why? I'll let you figure that out when and if you read it. The ending also masterfully sets up what is to come in the next book, at least in terms of the main character. But it's also extraordinarily fast paced, like all of the books in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder tend to be. Which means that if you like the general structure of the book, you'd be hard pressed to put it down at any one point. There are, of course, also weaknesses to the book. Lack of a certain weight that the first one had, which is pretty ironic that this one has a ticking time clock element that the first book lacks. I mean that should probably make the stakes higher, right? For whatever reason, it doesn't to me. I have no idea why. The pace can also get pretty fast at some points, overly fast, rushed. But overall, I can look past a lot of the book's faults and give it an 85 out of 100, 2 points less than its predecessor. And we finally move to the final Sanderson secret project, my opinions on which are incredibly mixed. This is by far my least favorite of the secret projects for a couple of reasons. For one thing, it is insanely action packed. Now I can hear you, Sid, isn't that a good thing? And to that, I'd say, kinda. I mean, as the years progress, I find myself not enjoying action scenes as much as I used to, which is weird because I still do love action. But weirdly enough, now action scenes are the things that I need to try my best to keep my focus on. Because dialogue and filler moments, I can get sucked into those easily. But action, I have a weird relationship with action. My mind tends to drift during action scenes, which is exactly what I don't want it to do. And when I really enjoy an action scene, I love it to bits. When it hits, it becomes something that I'll never forget as long as I live. But otherwise, yeah, so this is the book that just took the most effort out of me to read, which I doubt happened for other people, especially my friend Srishan. Hi Srishan, who has listed The Sunlit Man as his favorite secret project. But don't trust him on that, he hates Yumi, so he's like automatically wrong. Another problem with the structure and pacing of this book is that since it's so fast, it feels especially hard to connect with any of the side characters in the story, making it so that the large emotional aspect, which is usually very strong in Sanderson's books, is lacking. Sure, the emotional arc with the main character Nomad and his companion is pretty strong, though even that seems to falter a bit here and there. But other than that, if you ask me to list a couple of characteristics of side characters in The Sunlit Man, I would fail hard. So yeah, 74 out of 100. At the point after reading The Sunlit Man, I had resolved that I would read the final four Wheel of Time books back to back because I knew that these last four books are a highlight of the series for many. In fact, if you went up to some and asked them what their favorite Wheel of Time book was, it's pretty likely that they would give you one from the final four. Or they could say book four. People love book four. I am not an exception. But that being said, I decided that before I read four books of this size, look at that, yeah, I would take a bit of a breather and read a book that's a little lighter. One a bit more unconventional to what I usually read. And that book turned out to be The Rise of Kyoshi by FCU, a book that takes place in the world of Avatar The Last Airbender, which I actually watched for the first time this year. It was awesome, but I don't have to tell you that, you already know. I actually quite liked the book. It didn't really blow me away. It was really good, don't get me wrong, offering a look into this world from a fresh lens and a new time period, from a different avatar's lens too. But it didn't blow me away, which is okay, because I wasn't expecting it to. It's just that the fandom had hyped it up so much that I couldn't help but build up some unrealistic expectations for the book, however hard I tried not to. The main character, Kiyoshi, is pretty compelling in her journey, and the more that's revealed about her, the more I can empathize with her. I don't have much to say about this book, because for one thing, it's shorter than most, and for another, I don't really have many strong feelings on it. If you've watched The Last Airbender, give it a shot. It's a fairly good book. 9 out of 100. It's good. Here we go. The Wheel of Time draws to an end. The series, of course, because there are no endings to the turning of the Wheel of Time. But nonetheless, the 11th book of the series, Knife of Dreams, had quite the air of finality around it. Not just because we're only 4 books away from the ending of the series, but also because this is the final book exclusively authored by Robert Jordan, the creator and author of The Wheel of Time before his passing, which is extremely tragic, and I would have loved to see the final 3 books penned by Mr. Jordan. But Mr. Sanderson still did an absolutely amazing job with them. Probably the best what anyone could have done with the given circumstances. That being said, we are not here to talk about Sanderson. God knows I can drown on about him. My friends can attest. Hi, Arav. We're here to talk about Knife of Dreams. And when I tell you that this is my favorite book in the Wheel of Time, I say it for good reason. This book is when so many plot lines, set up as early as book 2, book 3, book 4, the list goes on, finally begin to reach their conclusion. So many things that we, as the readers, have spent such a long time waiting for to arrive. They do, and they do not disappoint. The weight that many of these scenes hold cannot be contested by most other series I've read. The individual character arcs continue on, and after crosses of Twilight and the rest of the slog, the absolute energy lent to the book in the sense of momentum is incredibly refreshing. Voice crack, the weight that so many of these moments hold cannot be overstated. Many of the best chapters I've ever read are held within this book. Specific chapter with Egwene, amazing. A specific chapter with Nynaeve and Lan, you know which one I'm talking about. Amazing. Rand, oh my god, Rand in this book. You have to understand, for a long time, Stormlight was my favorite series, and Wheel of Time was perpetually stuck in number 2. I thought it would stay that way, especially because of the slog. Like, it was still good. I enjoyed it. But Jesus Christ, if this book didn't skyrocket Wheel of Time straight into number 1. I could go on and on and on, and trust me, I have. But I also have 3 other books in the series to talk about, and 20 other books to talk about in total, so I will leave it at that. But just know that this is now my favorite book in this series. My favorite book of all time, tied with another that we'll get to later. That is Knife of Dreams, a 98 out of 100. And we finally get into the Sanderson side of the Wheel of Time, the final 3 books in the series and the ones he wrote. This tends to be people's least favorite of the 3 Sanderson wrote for whatever reason. Not me. I love this book to bits and it is my favorite Sanderson Wheel of Time book. Now, unlike most other books in the series, this one takes a focus on mainly 2 characters. Those 2 characters happen to be some of my favorites in the series. Well, one of them was actually my least favorite character for a while, but eventually became one of my favorites. And for that reason, my love for this book knows no bounds. The end of this book in particular, it's not a big epic battle or anything, but you've gotta know, it made me feel shit, man. Sanderson is amazing at writing these big, sweeping moments of solidarity and revelation, and this is no exception. Because, you know what? No spoiling. That's for the spoiler review. We'll talk about that later. Mr. Sanderson does a pretty good job with most of this book, as you can tell from my crazed rambling. Hi. But he does falter in some specific areas. For one thing, Matt's characterization is incredibly off, but it does get better in the next 2 books. There is also a noticeable difference in terms of the writing style and flows at various points, but it's not jarring enough to really constitute a loss. The strength of this book is that the character work displayed by it is jaw-droppingly amazing, especially Rand. The entirety of the series has been leading up to what happens in this book, and I love it for that. 97.5 out of 100. Next book. Now, coming off the absolute brilliance that is The Gathering Storm and Knife of Dreams before that, would this be able to live up to them? Well, for the most part, yes, but it's not quite as good as The Gathering Storm. So many of the moments in this book still hold a weight to them that I have yet to find in anything except Sanderson's other works. This book also focuses on 2 of the other main characters in the series, specifically ones that The Gathering Storm tended to neglect in favor of Rand and Egwene. And these characters' journey in this book was amazing from beginning to end, if not quite as good as the events that took place in The Gathering Storm. God, everything just has to live up to The Gathering Storm and every dreams now, doesn't it? This book was also daunting, as it was the second last book in the series that I now hold near and dear to my heart. So that was scary, but we'll talk about that when we get to the final book. The rest of the book is also great, but there's a specific sequence that many in the fan base tend to hate. I don't mind it, but I can kind of see where the hate comes from. I don't know. Moving on, I have less to say about this book because of spoiler reasons. If I could just rant unfiltered with spoiler mode on, I would. But I can't, so this is what y'all have to make do with. 96 out of 100. And the next one is the big one. The final book in this series that I have loved to bits. And it is everything that I wanted and more. I could not think with a gun to my head of a better way to end a series such as this. Everything just clicks into place with this book. You thought The Wheel of Time was slow, but how about we end the series with the biggest, most bombastic and action packed book you've read in your entire life? Now, I think I'm being pretty clear. I love this book, but it wasn't my favorite book in the series. The main reason being that it's a book that's mostly battle scenes. There's a battle chapter that's longer than the first Harry Potter book, for crying out loud. And as I've already said before, those aren't really my jam. But these action scenes have the advantage of following characters that I've known for 14 books up to this point. So the weight that comes with most battle scenes is already multiplied tenfold because this one got me in the feels. So often it's ridiculous. The amount of raw hype and excitement I felt while reading this book is actually insane. At one point, I was reading at 11:30 in the night, and I was so excited. I was pacing around the room the whole time, just reading the book while listening to y'all. Let me say that again. The book was so good, I could not physically contain myself. You know how insane that is. On top of that, after I finished reading for the day, I flopped down out of my bed and almost cried. Any book that can do that to you, yeah, it's a good book. Plus, the ending was just perfect. I know that Robert Jordan wrote it, and I can tell because the final chapter had me whooping with joy and with an overwhelming sense of completion, making all the time I devoted to the series feel so worth it. Almost every character gets an incredibly satisfying conclusion to their arc. Almost every plotline gets resolved perfectly. Hell, the only way I think this book could have been better is if Mr. Jordan himself was still alive to write it. A Memory of Light gets an astounding 97 out of 100, a perfect end to a perfect series. Now, the next book is a bit of an unusual one. After I finished The Wheel of Time, I was all geared up to jump back into Discworld until I checked my library and saw that one book was up for grabs. The World of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, as written by Teddy Sub Patterson. And yes, I don't read books of lore all too often, but I wasn't quite ready to give The Wheel of Time up as of yet. So I borrowed it, and it was good. I love getting more insight into this world, which I already knew was quite deep, but the amount of depth this one book added was pretty astonishing. Learning more about the history, the culture, the magic, everything about this book was just really fun. So yeah, 76 out of 100. I do not have much to say about it. And after that, I jumped right back into Discworld with the first two novels ever written in the series. And yes, I'm clumping these two together because they're basically one book. What are my opinions on these? Yeah. Before reading this, I was warned that the earliest Discworld books up until Mort were lackluster to say the least. That's why I started with book 8, Cards. And because of that, I couldn't really believe that a Discworld book could be anything less than good. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. Don't get me wrong, The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic are fine, but from Discworld, I expected more than just fine. These two thoroughly disappointed me, specifically the first one, The Color of Magic. I just had such a high standard set up for Discworld that these two books just really failed to meet. And yeah, if you couldn't tell, I do not love these books by any stretch of the word. Sometimes it could just be boring, and thankfully, they're not long books. But again, Discworld is anything but boring. Anything. Discworld should never bore. It's Discworld, it's the freaking cure for boredom. All I know is that I didn't like these. 68 out of 100. After the disappointment that was The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic, I hungered for some good Discworld. So my immediate thought was to go to what many call the best Discworld book, Small Gods. And let me just tell you, they were not wrong in any way whatsoever. I love this book to bits, and I am readily willing to call it the best Discworld book I've read thus far. However, Men at Arms still retained the number one spot, just because of how much my personal preference veers towards the City Watch side of Discworld. I still love this book though. For one thing, it is absolutely hilarious. What else are you gonna expect from Discworld? But it does take a bit more of a direct or serious tone with its writing. Now, that's not to say it goes full grimdark. Sir Terry could never, no matter how hard he tries, but it tones back the books a bit. especially considering some of the subject matter that this book deals with, which I'll get to talking about in just a second. But the book is still funny. It also deals with a pretty touchy subject among people, religion, but it does so with a tact that a lot of other books tend to lack. And through the subject matter, Sir Teddy is able to masterfully display how well he can convey themes in a story. Because based on this book, I could feel exactly what he was trying to convey, and he did it so perfectly that I couldn't help but love this book. The arc that this book goes through with its two primary characters was so captivating, especially with how it culminates in its ending. The final scene of Small Gods is something so absolutely perfectly written that it'll stick in my head for the rest of my life until I die. And I don't want to say more for fear of ruining it for a first time reader. All that taken in, Small Gods gets an easy 95.5 out of 100 for being an absolute masterpiece. And after that, the Discworld kick continued, and it continued with Reaper Man, the second book following that. And while this isn't as good as Small Gods, that doesn't mean it isn't a freaking masterpiece in its own right. Because God, did I love this book! The emotional chord and true line that passes through it the entirety of the book is enough to earn it a 5-star rating alone. But that coupled with everything else is pretty much perfect. This book is finally what solidified this world in my top 3 series of all time, and for good reason. It can make you feel. At so many points within the story, the dialogues between characters can be simultaneously hilarious while also provoking further thought beyond that, while also being comprehensive in its subject matter. There are two main plot lines within this book, one following Death and one following a wizard named Wendell Poons. And while I far prefer the Death plotline, the Poons line is also pretty fun to read. And of course, the ending blew me away once again, as it seems that this world will continue to do from here on out. I am continually blown away again and again and again by this world, and I still have 34 books to go. Geez, I can't imagine it getting any better than this, but I know for a fact that it will, and that excites me beyond compare. 95 out of 100. Now, I did read one book before this next one, but it wasn't a series that I read back to back, so I'll talk about the entire series as one. For now, I'll talk about This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is a book I was not expecting to like as much as I did, for one reason and one reason only. It was a romance book. Yeah, and anyone who knows me knows how big of a deal that is because most of the time I detest romance beyond reason. But this year I somehow managed to thoroughly enjoy not just one, but two romance novels. Two! What's wrong with me? God. But yeah, I've had my eye on this book for a while because of all the praise I heard for it. So when my friend Ishan, the twins both get a mention in this video, I decided when he borrowed it from his library, I decided to buddy read it with him. We both loved the book. It was amazing. We praised it for its prose, which was beautiful. Its unconventional plot line, which is mostly told through letters, which are masterfully written, and its world building, which, by the way, can be pretty confusing. Yeah, at the beginning of this book, I had no idea what was going on, and at the end of the book, it isn't much better, though I did come to understand more. Out of the two romance books I read this year, this one is my favorite, but not by much. Yumi is still amazing. I really want to read more that was written by these two authors, whose passion for the book you can just feel. I can't believe I'm saying this, but somehow the two romance novels I read were some of my favorite books of the year. What? How? Who knows? Whatever. This book is a clear 95 out of 100. 1 point more than Yumi. And now we move to the book that I read before Time War, or rather, the book series that I read before Time War. The First Law trilogy by one Joe Abercrombie. Now, reading grimdark fantasy for the first time was daunting to say the least. Very daunting. But this series made it all worth it. The first book that I read, The Blade itself, was an amazing read. Much better than I expected, becoming a bit of a pattern this year, isn't it? Now, you ask anyone who's read Mr. Abercrombie's work what his strong suit is, and most of them will tell you that it's his character work. As I've said many times before, yes. Yes, it absolutely is. And this first book mainly acts as setup for those characters and what is to come with them. And I was completely down for that. Their personalities were fun enough to read, but watching them do pretty much nothing was still entertaining. So you can imagine just how much I loved the parts where they actually did stuff. From the beginning, the first law has had a large amount of intrigue ingrained in it. This book also does a great job at setting all of that up. Then the second book rolled around, and that's when the plot started rolling as well. And the books got incredibly interesting after that too. Everything that made the first book so good was increased tenfold, and the books got even better somehow. Then the third book, my personal favorite, finally came, and my god, I could gush about this book all day long. Let's just say that the ending was absolutely perfect. perfect. Every aspect of it is something that I love, and it evokes exactly the kind of emotions that I believe it wants to. Again, I won't go too much into it because I don't want to rob first time readers of experiencing this completely blind. And I believe that the ending to the First Love trilogy is one of the best I've ever read, and I stand by that. So imagine how appalled I was when my friend Rishikesh came up to me and said that he did like the ending. Sorry, this is just something I'm gonna have to talk to him about on the spoiler review. I am phytochemically storing anger for that day. Until then, just know that I love this series and I will have words about this. The first book, The Blade itself, got a 95 out of 100 from me. The second book got a 95.5 out of 100, and the third book got a 96 out of 100. So it's just like just like point 0.5 increments each time. Isn't that fun? The next book is one that I really don't have much to say about. It's a short novella by Brandon Sanderson called Long Chills and Case Snow, which he uploaded for free online. And it was good. I quite enjoyed it for what it was, but it really isn't anything special. I experienced this one through the audiobook narrated by Raffo, or Read and Find Out by his full legal name. The narration was incredible, with Raffo having put on an accent for the entirety of the book. It's a charming, nice, fun little book, and I'd recommend reading it if you're in the mood for some good old futuristic detective shit. I know it's an oxymoron, just ignore it. 72 out of 100. Soon after Long Chills and Case Snow, I read the final book in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I absolutely loved it. Out of three books in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, this is quite easily my favorite, mainly for two reasons. This is the book with the most amount of tension out of the three, and it is also the book that centers the most around the main character Pip, dealing with her struggles with morality and her overall mental health problems, which, trust me, there's a lot of. Since the first two problems spend a lot of time setting up Pip's character and what you have to deal with in this book, and everything that's built up comes crashing down on her. By focusing on the main character, this book can bring it with a much smaller scope than what the previous two did. But somehow the smaller scope lends the story more tension and stakes, which is kind of the opposite of what you'd expect, isn't it? But nonetheless, I really love this book. Pretty much everyone I have asked has said that this is their favorite book in the series, except one person, but yeah, whatever. If I had to have one complaint about the book, however, I'd say that the ending is overly rushed, which doesn't really work in its favor. Those people who said that this was their favorite book all seem to agree that the ending was the worst part. And I don't think that would be the case if the ending had a little more time to cook, rather than just dumping you straight into where it went. The book is still great, but it could have been better. 91 out of 100. And right after that, I started a new series with Robin Hobb's famous Realm of the Endlings, starting with, of course, the first book, Assassin's Apprentice. I'd heard, of course, that these books were mind-numbingly slow. This was largely accurate, but that's not a bad thing, in my opinion at least. The book has large sections in which nothing that seems relevant is really happening. In fact, for most of the book, the reader isn't really sure that there is a plotline connecting the events, and most of the book simply has us following the main character as he grows up. But I find this pretty dang engaging, and it pays off in the long run because the time we spend with the main character helps us grow more attached to him as horrible things happen to him. Yeah, this series is also infamous for putting its characters through absolute hell, and this book apparently has the least of it. And it's already pretty bad, so yep, it gets worse, and I am scared. This book also took me a longer time to read than most of the others, and it's a lot shorter than stuff like, say, Stormlight or The Wheel of Time, so maybe the pace of the book was the reason, or maybe it was Miss Hobbs' writing style. Probably both, if I'm not gonna lie. Taking all that into account, Assassin's Apprentice was a really great read. Good doggo. 91 out of 100. Now, this next book is one that I really don't want to talk about because A, I already have a spoiler review up, and B, my opinions on this book have continued to sour after I finished it. This book is, of course, the 7th Percy Jackson, Wrath of the Triple Goddess. Yeah, which is the direct successor to last year's Chalice of the Gods. I didn't like it much. The book's worst crime is that it just doesn't feel like Percy Jackson. Everything is sometimes ever so slightly off. And other times, let me just say it's a bit less ever so slightly off and a lot more, geez, how are these two books even in the same series? Everything feels over exaggerated. Characters' personalities, the plot, the jokes are extremely unfunny. I don't even care anymore. This book is just kind of bad in my opinion now. went from 72 out of 100 to a 58 out of 100. And the final thing I read this year was actually a reread of the four main novels in the Stormlight Archive by guess who, Brandon Sanderson. I'm already making spoiler-free reviews of the series, so I'll try not to be too redundant here, as most people who know me personally already know I really, really love the series. So much so that I won't shut up about it. In fact, the past three scripts I've written for this channel have all mentioned the series in some capacity. So yeah, have fun hearing about that. The most surprising thing about rereading the series is that A, I actually like it more the second time around. This is surprising because it's rare and it's never happened to me before, and yet it seems that this is the rare exception. Somehow the entire experience of the story is heightened by knowing what comes later. B. Another surprise is that Oathbringer Book 3, which was once my least favorite of the four, actually became my second favorite of the entire series. For the rest of the points, I leave that to be talked about in my spoiler-free reviews. First book, 98 out of 100. Loved it. Second book, 95 out of 100. I actually liked it less this time around. Book 3, 97.5 out of 100. I really loved it. Rhythm of War, I haven't finished so far. 96, 97 out of 100. There we go. And from here, we get into my reading plans for next year. Next year, right out of the gate, the first thing I'll be reading is the fifth Stormlight book, Wind and Shoot. Words cannot describe how excited I am for this book, and it breaks my heart and soul that I won't be able to read it as soon as it releases because of stupid freaking board exams. God damn it! They ruin everything. I also want to continue my journey into the realm of the Underlings by Robin Hobb, which I've only read the first book of so far, but which I really love, so I'm supremely excited to read the later books in the series. I've heard great things about the rest of the series and just can't wait to get to them. I also want to start the Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is a series that has cultivated a reputation as the fantasy novel final boss because it's confusing as all hell apparently. And it's been a while since I've challenged myself in one of these. Bring it on. I also want to finish all the other series that I've started, but that's a bit of a tall order, so I'll just stick to those three for now. And when we get to that, we can finally move on. The announcement. So I already talked about pre-boards, yippee, and told you about the boards and everything that comes along with them. So me and the others working on the channel have come up with a plan to keep this content flowing during that time period. First off, after much deliberation, we have decided that the Uvid Gasas will continue. Yay! We've cultivated too much of a dedication to that show to just abandon it all willy-nilly for 3 whole months. That wouldn't be very weekly, would it? It's just that most of the main cast and 10th grade such as me, Prisha and Arav will not be able to be there for a large number of them, except for select episodes in between exams or on weekends. Second, we're working on a bunch of videos that are going to be scheduled to release during boards and pre-boards so that we can keep the non-Uvid Gasa content alive on the channel. Here are all the videos that we're currently working on for this. First off, this one. That's right, the video you're watching right now is actually the first of the pre-boards and boards content. Isn't that fun? Second, a Dragon Prince tier list ranking featuring Aditya and I. Dragon Prince is one of my favorite shows, so once I found out that he was watching it, I just knew we had to do this together. 3. A review of the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder TV show brought to you by Prisha. I know she's been working super hard on this. I just wanted a few videos on the channel so far that I have little to no involvement in until the editing stage. I can't wait to see what she cooks up, and I hope y'all can't either. Next, a Cosmere tier list with me, Ishan, and Rishikesh. This is another one I'm especially excited for. Next, a spoilery review of the first Lord trilogy with Rishikesh and I. I'm pretty dang excited for this, and you should be too, because in this video I'll be unleashing the full flames of my anger at Rishikesh for what is factually the worst crime one can commit, disagreeing with my opinions. Another video I'm working on is a top 10 book series of all time that's off for editing right now. I don't know when it'll be out, but it's coming. Next, Adi is also working on a couple of videos with some of his friends, and I'm pretty excited to see what he cooks up. Though I have pretty much no idea what the actual plan is for those, Adi's in it, so I am sure it'll be amazing. There's some other ones we're working on, and we'll announce them as we go on. Until then, stay tuned, and we will smell you later.